Good morning, everybody. Deanna and Evelina and Leonard. It's good to see you. Um, yeah, I'm gonna invite you all to join me if you want to, like just on camera or whatever. I think you'll show up as on camera if you want to. I'm not sure. Um, but yeah, and don't feel like you have to. And I'm gonna start recording to the cloud. Right, yeah, good morning, everybody. Welcome to the Free Friday discussion. Hi, Evelina. Hi, Deanna. Hi, Leonard. I'm sure there's going to be some more folks popping in at some point, and those of you who are watching later on a recording. And thanks for joining me for our, first Free Friday we've done for a little while, and also talking about rewilding the planet. Wow. Big idea there. Something that's very important in my heart and mind, and just, I think it should be something we're all talking about. And I think this is going to be the first in a long series. This might even just be the introduction to this topic. But it's nice to have some folks here live. Always fun to have questions and ideas and answers back and forth. And yeah, I want to start by expressing some gratitude this morning that I do live in the beautiful place I do with green things I can still see outside and birds around. There's lots of birds in my yard. There's birds all over the forest. There's eagle nests nearby. Even though I'm in town, I could take you right to an eagle nest. It'd take about a 15-minute walk from where my house is to walk you over and show you an eagle nest. And so I am thankful for the lands I live in, which are the, as many of you know, traditional territory of the Snoqualmie people. And yeah, people have been living here for a long time, at least 10,000 years, probably significantly longer than that, based off of more recent archaeological evidence. And if anybody wants to type into the chat what they're thankful for, and or Evelina or Deanna, if you want to say what you're thankful for on camera, that's great too. And you can share where you're calling in from or where you're coming from.
In Crawford, Colorado, and I am thankful for our upcoming class. I'm very excited.
Yes.
And meeting you in person. So
that would be great, Evelina. Yeah, there was Bird on a Free Friday, right? Yeah, one of these, I think about a month or 6 weeks ago. Evelina and I met on one of these Free Friday talks where I just kind of did an open one of like, ask me anything. So excellent. Well, thank you. Deanna or Leonard or Heath, are you all thankful for anything? You got any gratitude this morning or anything you want to share about where you're calling in from? And if not, that's fine.
Hi, Deanna here, and I'm just very grateful for the spring and the beautiful plants that are all growing and blooming and blossoming right now. It's just beautiful. Love the Pacific Northwest and the ancestral lands of the Snoqualmie people.
Awesome. Thank you, Deanna. Yes, we're both blessed by the return of the green here. Not that the green really ever goes away here, because there's moss and there's so many conifers and other plants that keep their leaves all winter long, but now it's like really green, and the leaves are even starting to just come out a little bit on some of those plants. So, just wanted to set some context for what we're doing here. So, I use the term rewilding a lot in my work, both my spoken work and even my written work. And I don't know that I've done a particularly good job of defining it. And I think one of the reasons why I do that is I shy away from that because people can be very particular about their definitions of words and terms in general. But I've also realized, as we dive deeper into this concept of, the big challenges we face on this planet, for me, during my lifetime, the biggest threat, I think, for me, for my in fact, I have children, for grandchildren I might have, is the just continued deterioration of the biosphere. and loss of habitat. And I would actually even argue that while that's linked to climate change, it's actually a bigger threat than climate change itself. Really they're intertwined, right? We can't really take them apart. And one of the things that's been, I think hard for people my generation growing up is to see that this is something that like was brought to our attention in high school. Like, I mean, I went to high school over 30 years ago now, and in high school, we were, climate change, depletion of resources, loss of habitat, all this stuff was taught to us. Now, maybe that wasn't typical at that time for that high school, but, and, we kind of have to face that in those 30 years, even though some of us have been, doing work around it or related to those issues, things have actually gotten worse, not better. Now, there are exceptions, and I think it's really good to point out the exceptions. So, for instance, when I was a kid, two environmental issues that are no longer a big issue, or not as big of an issue, are ozone depletion, so holes in the ozone layer, and acid rain. Both of these things have shifted significantly. So it's we can make differences. And there has been on a species by species basis, there has been some remarkable things done. So in my life, I think you all have heard, some of you have heard me talk about this. The wolves have come back in places that they were basically extinct when I was a teenager, in multiple locations in the United States and in Europe. And they're living relatively peacefully coexistence in those places. Now, like, a lot of people are going to argue with me about that, because in those places the wolves are hunted, and then, like, what's that? But actually, they've come back in thriving numbers, and not only that, they actually have restored ecosystems by being back, including in Yellowstone National Park. So when I first went to Yellowstone National Park many years ago, there were no wolves there. Zero. So, and now they're all over the place. There's several packs. So, well, yeah, welcome Daria and Heath. And Heath, I see that you're not going to be able to join us on the screen. That's fine. And Daria, I'm going to send you an invitation to join us on screen if you want to. You don't feel like you have to. So one of the ways we can talk about approaching that big issue, which is certainly still present. And I know there are things like, people will argue that, like, there's things like what's going on with the Ukraine. And it's like, of course, like, with Ukraine, sorry, not the Ukraine, with Ukraine and Russia. Or there's issues like COVID. Like, of course, these are, world-altering human issues. But so often I find that you cannot talk to people about the fact that the biosphere is being eroded. They do not want to hear about it. They will just, like, turn away from it. It's like the biggest issue of denial, like, we are facing as human beings. And I think one of the things that's really amazing that about the life of and story of Greta Thunberg from Northern Europe is her willingness to just call it out, like, to call out all the adults. She's like, I cannot believe you're not doing anything about this. This is ridiculous. Like, I'm a teenager, and you all are, like, letting the world fall apart. And, I've found that with my own children, my eldest child, it was even in some ways more complicated or more difficult for them, because at their high school, they were put, the teachers, I think, probably in a thoughtful way or a way that they intended good, they put the problem on the teenagers, said to them, like, you're going to need to solve this problem of, like, global climate change and loss of habitat and biosphere. And that just shut them all down. They were so mad. They were so furious. They said, like, how dare you put this on us as 15-year-olds that we have to figure out global climate change. And I think for me, like, when I heard that, the thing I was most challenged about that was just that the sort of dishonesty and the lack of ownership that, say, people my generation and the boomer generation, the lack of taking responsibility for, like, what we're facing. So, but, and if you want to have a really great example of what I'm talking about that just kind of lays it all out, like I think in the best way possible. I would highly recommend you check out this documentary. It's called A Life on This Planet, and type it in, by David Attenborough, and it is on Netflix. Right? It's a remarkable documentary. David Attenborough, I assume most of you know who he is, but he's this amazing naturalist, amazing biologist who's gone out, done field work for years, especially bringing on camera live animals and people seeing things in the wild. Like our World of Nature documentary is hugely influenced by David Attenborough, and he's some of the best of the last 15 years has come about by David Attenborough. He's the narrator for most of those documents. But what's lovely and challenging and intriguing about his most recent work is that he actually shows very clearly what's happened in his lifetime. He just lays it out, like the actual pictures, actual documentation, imagery, but also statistics of like what's happened, where like when he was basically starting his work, about a third of the wilderness areas and species of the planet had been eroded, and that in the 30, 40 years since he's been doing his work, another third has disappeared. So we have basically 33% left. And that number varies in places. But at the end of his documentary, he really puts forth this idea, because it's really his testament and his call out to people to like, you know, like, what can we do? And he says, well, we have to rewild the planet. We have to just, you know, rewild the whole thing, or at least to some significant degrees. And he does put out these really cool examples of places where this has happened. So I'll share a couple examples, and feel free if anybody has a question or comment at any time to put it in the chat or to pause me, and anybody who wants to come on live with us, feel free to. So there's a country in the Pacific that's called Palau. I believe that's the name of the island. It's an island country, and they adopted a really interesting policy. They made it so, and they exist. Their livelihood comes from fishing in the ocean. So what they had to do was they numbers kept going down and down and down. So they just set aside specific areas around their island where they don't fish. And what's stunning, and I've heard this explored, talked about before by marine biologists, is if you don't fish in those areas, what happens? What do you think?
The fish migrate there, and I don't know, that's their safe spot where they can spawn, and
yeah. So the fish in those areas, obviously they don't get caught. Their numbers stay healthy. But what people didn't realize is it's not just that they stay healthy or whatever. They spawn in such great numbers, they actually go fill all the other areas where the people are fishing too. So by setting aside areas where they didn't fish, the numbers actually went up in the places they were fishing drastically. So there's a whole lot of, or I should say there's several good examples of this, including some cool imagery of like what the world might look like if we were to do things like that, right? So, but it brings me to this bigger question of like, okay, what does rewilding even mean? And like I mentioned at the beginning of this, and I think one way we can talk about it is there's kind of a European version and an American version so far. And as I understand it, the European version, which is, and both of them are lovely, like I like both of them, but the European version really focuses on landscape and habitat. And there's this realization, and they've seen this over the last 40 years, that when you leave areas alone, you don't even like restore them, you just leave them alone. If there's somewhat intact ecosystem somewhere nearby, those places will restore. They'll grow into lovely, amazing forests. And Chernobyl is one of the best examples of this, right? What's happened in Chernobyl is like all the humans left because of the radiation, and the forest has taken back over Chernobyl. And now there are like wolves running through Chernobyl, there are foxes, there are moose, there are bear. that just weren't able to be there before when the humans were there occupying the cities there. So there's this physical rewilding of the land, right? Like this like literally leaving land alone. And I think, we can discuss whether that's a good strategy or not, but that's one way that rewilding is used as a term. In the U.S., as my understanding, rewilding is used more as a term referring to humans in our culture, and especially our relationship to material things and our relationship to capitalism and civilization. And really, rewilding is kind of an anti-civilization approach. And when I say anti-civilized, I don't mean it talks about like killing things or being violent with each other. It's more like questioning the very idea of an agricultural and an industrial-based civilization model of human life. And what are the actual costs of that? And then what are the alternatives? And often like looking at hunter-gatherer models and what we can do in our individual lives to possibly learn from the other systems that are healthy and more, or maybe not healthy, but healthier, but have other approaches. So that's the big, broad approach to rewilding. Like those are two ways of thinking about it. And yeah, Evelina, thank you for this question in the chat. Do you think leaving this land alone in this model means that people can't even minimally interact with it, not in an extractive way? And so I think this is a fascinating question. And one of the things people have found really going into this is there's been kind of two approaches to this. There's sort of the, again, the American model, which I'm most familiar with, being in America, is this sort of preservation mode of like, okay, there's wilderness areas and humans can only minimally interact with those, and then there's places we conserve and humans do interact with them in somewhat of an extractive way. But there's this heavy focus on humans not having any impact, if that's even possible, right? Like, or minimizing the impact. Versus there are other models that have now shown that actually humans interacting in landscape in the right way actually causes the landscape to flourish and thrive and biodiversity to increase. And some of the best places I know of these stories are from Hawaii with their traditional aquaculture and agriculture and the ways they worked with the plants in the land and the animals in the land and even going down into the oceans. And then also the lands of California. And there's a great book I believe it's called Tending the Wild. And it's all about this. I think it's M. Cat Anderson is the author of that book, right? Yeah, okay, Evelina's clapping their hands. Yay! Okay, you know what I'm talking about. And yeah, it's this idea that actually some of the most famous landscapes in California, including the landscapes that John Muir wandered through and waxed to, pull up philosophically about how gorgeous they were and how minimal the human impact was, were actually heavily managed by the native people, including through controlled burns and things like that. So, oh, yay! Look at that. Evelina, you're awesome. Yeah. So I think that one of the ways we need to think about this is like, if we're trying to rewild, like what are we rewilding, what scale, where, and how? And what I wanted to just put out to everybody today, I'm going to type this into the chat, is I do think we need to be doing rewilding like the land on a global scale, right? So this is an effort of like some of what they're describing in Europe and such, right? But I also think we need to really look at rewilding our lives and even our mindset, our bodies, our consciousness, like all of these things. Like, what is it really like to rewild ourselves? And, rewild things like our spaces, our yards. I'm a big advocate of rewilding our yards. Like those of us who live in like the suburban, like my neighbors don't like my yard, like, because like I let things grow and I'm experimental and I'm introducing native plants and I'm introducing non-native plants, and it's like, but what's happening in my yard is like, all of the insects that everybody's trying to kill in the like, 5-block radius around my home, where they're bringing and they're spraying, and like they all come to my house. Like, they talk about like, like this global drop in like pollinators, bees. There's so many bees and so many wasps and so many spiders that live in my yard, and we love it. Like it's a truly biodiverse yard. So rewilding our spaces, our homes, our yards, the land we're a part of. And then the piece I'm also want to talk about is rewilding our kids, our children. Like, what does that look like? Rewilding education. So I want to pause, and I'd love to hear from people through the chat. Oops. Oh, sorry. I didn't take that down. All right. Through the chat, or if you'd like to talk live about what does rewilding look like for you? Like, how does it relate to your life? What's your idea of how we could rewild the world, if we're talking about the whole world, if that's even what we want to do? How does it look like for you? What do you do? And I know, Evelina, you probably have some things to say about this, being like where you live and what your life is like, and I'm excited to hear about that and have you share as well. And I would love to, in a future Free Friday, set up an interview with you, Evelina, and we can just talk about like a little bit more about Wild Cooperative and what's going on there. So, but yeah, like I'm curious, what does this rewilding look like for you all? All right, Daria says, for you, it's primarily about rewilding consciousness and releasing the programming of control. Okay. And Daria, what does it feel like when there's that rewilding of consciousness happens and that releasing of that aspect of control happens for you? What does that look or feel like? All right. I'll wait for Daria's answer. Evelina, did you have something you wanted to share?
Sure. This is my fourth full-time year on the land here, and we live off grid in the mountains of Western Colorado. And yeah, the steps, I mean, they were pretty small in the beginning. And I think that's really good not to overwhelm yourself, because we've been pretty conditioned to not consider ourselves as wild or think of it as like a pejorative way of calling yourself a wild person. Or but yeah, I think overall over those few years, I'm kind of embracing all of the true nature of being a heterotrophic animal on this planet. So accepting the fact that I am going to extract things. I can't, as far as I know, I can't go out in the sun and produce my own food from the UV, right? I need things from this planet to nurture me, and but also that means that I feel the full responsibility of taking from the earth, right? So to me, like, that was the biggest hurdle to go through, not considering myself a parasite on this planet, or or a person who's always going to be destroying things. How you mentioned about Kat Anderson's Tending the Wild. We will always have impact, but it could be negative and positive impact. And I don't know, I always consider like, as long as your positive impact is somewhat more than the negative impact, right? So like your handprint is bigger than your footprint. I don't know, you can some sound bites, but but basically kind of just tend the wild, knowing that yeah, you're gonna be destroying or killing or you know, culling some kind of population of things inadvertently. So that's it, just kind of embracing that full nature of what it means to be an animal on this planet.
Yeah, we have an impact, right? We're not going to be able to have no impact. And in fact, the whole notion of oh, I can't even think what they call it now, the whole camping thing where you don't have any impact, right? Like it's kind of a false. What's that?
Leave no trace. Is that
Yeah, leave no trace. We can't leave no trace. We always leave some trace. So like, what is our relationship with that trace, right? And yeah, I love that food is one of the things you brought up, Evelina, because it is one of the primary interactions. And like, we're eating 3 times a day, or most of us, or sometimes more, sometimes a little bit less. And like, it is an opportunity to like change that relationship with resources again and again and again. And it's so hard. I mean, like where I live, there's an urban environment over there 45 minutes to the west that way. There's been major changes around some things around like packaging and getting food in restaurants, but then there's other places like where I live, like just in my neighborhood or whatever, where people are still using styrofoam or what, like, and it's like you get where you don't want to like interact with your own community or buy any of the food in your own community because it's all coming from really far away and then it's being packaged, but it's also the way you support the folks in your town. So rewilding our food, right? Like how we eat it, how growing or gathering some of it, looking at where it comes from, like more local, and I talk about for people, even just developing relationships with farmers in your bioregion, right? And like how that there's a huge opportunity there to go. And if you want to get a sense of like what I'm talking about, like that we're kind of designed for this, right? Like that our human brains are designed to do these things. Go take your family or some friends and go to a you pick berry farm. Blueberries, raspberries, whatever, blackberries, whatever, and just like, or go pick wild berries too if you know how to do that. But if you don't know how to do that, just go to a you pick farm and then just watch everybody lose their mind as they're like gathering fruit fresh off a vine and eating some of it, and then they go home with these buckets of berries. Some great focus things in the chat here. So I had shared, I lived for many years off-grid raising my family, and you experienced so much of that time, including taking your children out of school for periods of time and just letting them play and explore. Yeah, felt it was essential for them to develop their own relationship with the natural world. They developed awareness and skills that the other kids in the community did not seem to have. To this day, they are high-functioning humans with a great sensitivity to life. Yes, I would agree. And, I'm starting a class in a couple weeks on a Tuesday. It's called Rewilding Our Kids. And I really want it to be designed for people who are both totally for homeschooling their kids or even unschooling their kids, but also for anybody who's an auntie or an uncle or whatever, and the kids are in public school. Because what you're talking about, Ayata, is like, I think the natural human instinct, the natural instinct of kids to develop this relationship to nature and to have these healthy, high-functioning connections. And it's usually through play and exploration. It's not, and we can massage it a little bit, we can like enhance that, but it's not necessarily this like very knowledge-focused thing. And I get to do this all the time with my son, who is like so into making things right now. He's 4, but he's like using stone knives to like shape sticks, and every day there's a new invention he's making with sticks. Like he made tongs the other day. He's like, Dad, look at my tongs. Like, and he's like, can I bring my tongs inside? And I'm like, well, are they fire tongs? He's like, no, they're just tongs for picking things up. Like, and he, so there's almost an infinite variety of what the kids will learn to explore and play with. So And then Daria, thank you for answering my question. Yeah, so what does that look like with rewilding our consciousness? It's like re-entering a stream of life beyond judgment and recognizing the rightness of where we are here and now in time and in this moment of the evolutionary journey. Fundamentally about self-compassion, like Evelina was talking about. So I have a great example of this. So I've been a part of a men's group for 4 or 5 years now. Many of the men in my men's group I've known for over a decade. Several of them are in the field of nature awareness and ancestral skills and what we might call rewilding. And two of the most profound conversations we've had, outside of our general like exploration of masculinity and especially trying to find a positive masculinity in our current world, two of the most profound conversations we had was, one was about time, where the eldest member of our group, who's I think about 5 to 10 years older than I am, just was discussing about how he's, because of his current lifestyle, he's gotten completely away from a schedule. Like he doesn't have a schedule and he doesn't look at his phone. He doesn't have a smartphone, and like what it does to his brain to just be free from the notion of a schedule. And that to realize that a schedule is actually a relatively modern invention. Like there's whole groups of people on the planet, both historically and currently, who don't have a schedule. Like that they just, every day they're alive and present in that moment and respond to what arises on that day. And then another friend, another man in that group, talking about finally letting go of this thing, especially in wintertime, of needing to get up by a certain time, or like sleep less or more than a certain time. Like he really felt like if he was sleeping more than 7 hours, that there was something wrong, that there was something, he wasn't being productive enough. And then really, looking at like what are the roots of thinking that we have to be productive, and also looking at like the ways we tend to be productive on this planet. And this is one of those things, again, like, you're not supposed to say to people and it scares them. And it's like the kind of thing I just wrote about in my blog about how like the reefs are dying in Maui, and they're dying because people are wearing sunscreen and jumping into the ocean. And, finally people are admitting to that. But nobody wants to talk about it because they're like, well, that means if I go to Maui, I might not be able to jump in and swim with the turtles, because and thankfully they have the right sunscreen. But looking at like the human impact on things like that, coming back to production, that actually most of the activities we consider being productive are actually harming the planet. Like on a general societal thing, like most of the things of like going to work, getting in a car, driving somewhere, using a bunch of devices, eating out lunch, like, a lot of it, and most of the jobs are either, like related to being on a screen, or a lot of them come back to some form of resources extraction. So, all right. Okay, so lots of good things in the chat here. Ayata is saying that you still harvest a lot of herbal medicine and some food like nettles, maple blossoms, chickweed salad, and steaming greens and berries. Yes, that is gathering, foraging. It's one of my favorite ways to engage with this, and it's instinctive. And you got to spend childhood summers on your grandparents' farm in Canadian prairies. You didn't even have electricity in the 60s. So you had a connection with the natural world. Hand-pumped water, root cellars. Wow, I love it. And this is the thing, is just even a couple generations ago, people were much closer to this, especially in certain parts of the world. All right. Yeah, and let's work on developing those things. I agree, Ruchi. Excellent. Well, I want to just kind of come back to this framework that we're looking at, and then I'm going to give one more example, and then I think we'll wrap up for today. But so if we want to really work on like the biggest issues around the planet, right? Like the actual deterioration of the biosphere, the loss of habitat, global climate change, right? We really have to look at like doing things in a very different way. And one of the ways we can look at that is through this lens of rewilding, and rewilding the whole world. And when we say the whole world, we're not just talking about like nature habitats, though. That's part of it, and like setting aside land and restoring wilderness. And I think we can make an argument of like how much human interaction that requires. I have seen and heard about that people are now regrowing coral and have created these methods of grafting coral on to regrow coral reefs. And it may be that we have to do steps like that in certain parts of the world to just help our world come back in places and restore some of that biosphere. But so rewilding habitat, rewilding nature, rewilding ourselves, right? Like whatever that looks like at the human level, rewilding the spaces around us, our houses, our land, our streets, our city design. Like there's starting to be these amazing things happening. If you are curious about this, in Singapore, they've started to bring in a lot more vegetation into their cities, and actually animals are coming into their cities because they've realized that keeps the cities cooler, and it like reduces the amount of carbon they're putting out, but also keeps the heating bills down, the air conditioning bills down. Like that actually, by rewilding their cities, they're actually, it's benefiting all the people and the plants and the animals. So redesigning our spaces, and I wanted to just talk about even our bodies. And I think, Leonard, you've done some of my movement classes. I use this term a lot, rewilding our bodies, and I think people are like often wonder what I'm talking about. And like I'm going to give a really clear example. So like let's all just stand up wherever you are. Hopefully you can see me. I'm going to put myself on screen real quick here. So, all right. So like let's just look at our bodies, right? So much of our focus, mine included, is forward facing, and it's like, and tends to be in these square areas. So like for instance, like just take your arm and like draw a circle, like you're going to draw a circle diagonally behind you, right? And just move the arm in circles back behind you, right? And we'll just do that both ways, just both ways. On the other side. And you could do this outside too, but this can be done inside, right? We're inside right now. The other way. All right, and then like imagine you've got two sticks and you're drawing circles on the ceiling. And you're drawing circles the other way on the ceiling. And you're drawing circles on the ground. Now you're drawing circles side to side. And the other way. Now just like circling through, like you're swimming forward with your arms. And now like you're swimming backwards with your arms. All right, and then just shake out your arms. And just notice how you feel, right? Like, often when I do those exercises with people, and maybe some of you are experiencing this, they're always like, I feel so much better. Like I feel like all this warmth in my chest, and I can breathe differently, and my mind feels refreshed. And I think what this demonstrates is just like the lack of, you can feel energy circulating, exactly, Evelina. This is all about like what our society, our world right now is designed to keep us focused in certain ranges of motion and ranges of awareness. So one of the things we almost never do is put our arm behind us. Okay? Like this is one of the weakest ranges of motion for most people. And it's pretty common for people to actually injure their rotator cuff when they're in a car and they reach behind them to grab something, like they're reaching to grab a bag of groceries, or reaching back to do something with their kid in the car seat. And it's because we don't move this way, even though our shoulder and our body's totally capable of moving that way. And what I would put forth is this is an analogy for our life in general, like our world in general. There's all these things and places we're not paying attention to. And my hope is over the next, I don't know, like few months on these different Fridays, we'll take a different aspect of this and we'll just unpack it, like rewilding our food, rewilding the land, rewilding our bodies, rewilding our kids, and just go through this. And it's fun to hear people's stories of what they've already done. Yeah. Oh, this is, thank you. Incredible number of muscles in the human bodies, and animals use all their muscles, but we humans in our civilized world only use a small fraction because of our lifestyle, and this causes a lot of health problems. Exactly. I agree. And Evelina, thank you for also bringing up the whole notion of a natural circadian rhythm, right? Like, what is our natural circadian rhythm? If you really, and even getting, I don't know if you all have electric lights where you are, Evelina, but how amazing it is when you stop using electric lights for a little while. Like, what happens, you know? And then at night, if you want to, you'll go to sleep earlier most of the time. But part of it is that you might have a fire, right? And you're outside and you have a fire. And then when the fire dies down to coals, everybody just goes to sleep, right? And then the amazing relationship you develop with dawn and the sunrise when you do that. So, all right. Ooh. Okay, thank you, Leonard, for sharing this. So on some of the rewilding the body journeys we've gone on together, your body, after some practices, starts to move more and more freely and intuitively, especially from the inside out, with music or, yeah, exactly. And all of the movement forms I do are all based off of natural movements, right? And it's no like, it's not a workout, exactly. Yeah, great. All right, well, I want to give people a couple minutes to ask any last questions or comments for today. And yeah, like I said, this will be the start of like a series. And I am doing a specific series for parents and mentors, and a formal class starting in a couple weeks. And I'm excited to announce something I haven't done for a while. I'm going to go to where Evelina lives, and I'm going to teach in person, which I haven't done for at least 2 years, closer to 3 years probably. And I'm going to teach a couple of classes there. So we'll say some more about those in a future class. But yeah, good. Okay, steps, one step at a time, Daria. I agree. And yeah, cities, you know, there are the wild places in the cities, and that's a good place to start. So, and yeah, growing herbs in your apartment or on your balcony, you know, it can be can start small. Just have some green stuff in there. All right. Well, thank you, everybody. This is fun. And yeah, as always, you can reach out to me and just email me with your questions or your stories. I love your stories. One of the consequences of doing things online now is like I get less direct interaction with people. So the stories I am sent by people are really helpful. And before we go, Evelina, would you mind saying just a couple words about what it's like these days at Wild Cooperative and you know around your all's rhythms there?
Sure. So we're at 7,000 feet elevation. So our spring has started, but it's very slow coming. But the birds are so excited. They're so chatty everywhere, and it's amazing. Yeah, we're seeing more species of birds come in, and yeah, we're finally seeing buds on trees and shrubs, and the bees are bringing in some resin, and it's really nice to see that. The snow is finally melting. And what else is happening? We're slowly getting the snow melt, so the rivers are being more audible. You can hear them all around. We have 2 beautiful creeks transecting our land. And what else is happening? I started a bunch of starts for the garden, and more will come. I'm trying not to be too eager to start too many because our last frost date is the second week of June, so I still have ways to go. But I started I'm trying to expand our medicinal garden. So I started some wild medicine from seed, and they're stratifying out in the open. So I'm happy to see those grow. And like we were mentioning about tending the wild, I'm definitely going to try and propagate some local wild herbs so I can increase the population and kind of just fill in some spaces here on the land, and maybe do some basically forest gardening all around us. Yeah, so much happening. That's
Awesome.
just a fraction of it.
That's great, Evelina. And I look forward to talking maybe in a week or two. Maybe we can figure out which Friday is going to work best for you to just do a little bit more, just hear about the story and the vision of Wild Cooperative. Because where Evelina lives and is working and designing is exactly kind of what I'm talking about. A place that's devoted to doing all of this on a lot of levels, and yeah, it's pretty exciting. So I'm glad there are places like Wild Cooperative in the world, Evelina. They give us all hope, I think. So thanks for doing what you do.
Thank you very much.
Yeah. All right, everybody. Well, thank you and have a great week. And we'll be in